From the Midtown Detroit studios of 1019 WDET, this is the Craig Foley Show for Tuesday, February 21st of 2012. Thanks for being here today. In just a little bit. But first, we've spent a lot of time on this program and other programs and other newspapers talking about access to food in the city of Detroit. And for a lot of people, they see no chain grocery stores in the city. They maybe don't see a Kroger, so they just assume there aren't any grocery stores in the city of Detroit. Well, that would be incorrect. There's 85 independent grocers in the city of Detroit, maybe a few more, but they don't necessarily get inclusion on this new list put together by the Chaldean American Chamber of Commerce. It's called mydetroitgrocers.com. It's an online resource for Detroiters to find grocery stores in the city that meet their needs. And joining me right now is Martin Manna, president of the Chaldean American Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's talk about why, first of all, it was necessary to do this. Because, these are a bunch of independent businesses that got together and decided they needed a resource. Why was this necessary? Because I'm not sure. Does this exist anywhere else?
I'm not so sure that it exists in other places, but I think in Detroit there's been this conversation that many people don't have access to fresh food. There's no fresh food stores in the city of Detroit. We've heard a lot of negative stories. And so these grocers really have been a little overwhelmed, I think, with a lot of negative stories. They wanted to do something different. So over the course of the last few years, they've engaged in many different activities, including giving people tours of stores in the city of Detroit, helping people understand that there are fresh options in the city of Detroit, and most importantly, giving people a history of why there aren't any chain stores in the city of Detroit. The mydetroitgrocers.com website is another opportunity for them to say that, hey, there are several options in the city. You don't necessarily have to shop in the suburbs. There are fresh food options. There are some beautiful stores. Many of them were former Farmer Jack and Kroger stores, and they're right down the street from where you live.
Okay, why the equation of chain and quality that seems to exist? Because in a lot of communities where I live, there are a number of small independent markets that I prefer to shop at if I can to the chain stores that exist because they have sometimes better stuff. So why is it that the lack of chains makes people think that there aren't decent stores?
I think to be candid, there have been unfortunately some instances where there have been some bad stores, and it's painted a negative image on the rest of these grocers. The overwhelming majority of these stores are very good. I live in the suburbs, and there's a lot of independent supermarkets in the suburbs that do a great job, as they do in the city of Detroit. I just think that so much negative publicity has been shed that there's no good grocery stores in the city of Detroit. Many residents never walked into any of these places. That's why the website gives you an opportunity not only to see how close the store is to your residence or your place of work, but also provides photos. This is how the exterior looks like. Here are some beautiful shots of the store on the interior. We have some photos of their produce section, for example. They're over the meat counter, many different options that they are available to them.
I want to talk about the map, first of all. I think this is maybe the most important part of this website, is this interactive map that exists. You've got links to stores that have their own websites. You've also got pictures of the various stores' locations. And there are stars on maps on those that are members of the Chaldean American Chamber of Commerce, but you also include all the independent grocers that meet your standards but that aren't members. Why was it important to include them all?
Well, this is not just about Chaldeans. While the Chaldean American Chamber of Commerce was tasked with putting together this website, we wanted to make sure people understood that this is not just about Chaldeans or our members, but all the different options that are available in the city of Detroit. And not all of those folks are our members, and not every independent grocer in the city of Detroit is Chaldean either. I think people don't understand that occupational patterns have formed. Chaldeans have been merchants historically. They own a lot of the independent supermarkets in the city, but they also own them in the suburbs as well. They have a large ownership in that type of industry. And so we wanted to make sure people knew of all the options, not just the ones that were Chaldean.
Does the fact that so many of the independent grocery stores in the city are indeed owned by Chaldeans impact how people perceive them? Because there have been stories in the past about conflicts that may arise between the Chaldean grocery store owners and the largely majority African-American population that shops at these stores.
Sure, and then that's another challenge I think independents face. While Kroger might come up to the city, or a Meijer, or whoever it might be, and say, hey, we're donating all this money in the name of Meijer to schools or whatever it might be, independents don't have that brand image. They don't have this consortium of pooling their resources together. They do donate in large sums of money. They do adopt schools. They do adopt parks, but it's the individual store doing it in their local neighborhood. And so for that reason, I think many people don't understand the ways they give back. There's a lot of negative stereotypes. Chaldeans don't necessarily hire from the communities in which they serve. And so part of the resources on the website is how many of these people are employed. So these independent grocers employ more than 2,000 people. More than 60% live within the neighborhoods in which the store is at. And then there's a history, too. Before the Chaldeans, most of these stores were owned by members of the Jewish community. Before that, the Italian community. Many immigrant communities own stores throughout the country. And in L.A., it's the Korean community. So immigrant populations tend to form, as I said before, occupational patterns. And I think there has been some resentment because the overwhelming majority of the customers are African American. I think what we're trying to do, not only with this website, but as an organization, is make sure that they're giving back. A, they're hiring from the community. B, they have beautiful stores that everyone could be proud of, not only in the city, but in the suburbs. And the fourth thing is working on some long-term programs in which we could help the African American community engage in becoming entrepreneurs, which is so much a big part of our history.
You know, I think one of the big things that you have to tackle here, and when we talk about, again, perception, is there was, frankly, a time when there wasn't a whole lot of policing going on as to how clean some of these stores were, how well maintained, or how often the stock was rotated, complaints about food that was spoiled. In fact, there are some markets in the city that are not on your list because they have not met a new standard. Is this sort of a new standard you're trying to create for being accepted into this website?
Well, let me just say that the overwhelming majority of these stores have been great stores and always have been. Mm-hmm. If you remember when Farmer Jack closed in the city,
a couple of bad stores, though, can ruin the reputations of people who have been doing the right thing for a long time.
Absolutely, and it's an industry issue. If we look at a couple things, Farmer Jack, when they closed, was rat-infested, a very dirty store, and that was a chain store. You and I could go to a Kroger in Bloomfield Township right now, and you and I could buy expired items off of the shelves. It's just an enormous issue because there's so many different products in that store. The difference, though, in the city of Detroit, these folks are always under a constant spotlight that, you know, they have to run the best stores. If they're not, it's perceived to be that they're taking advantage of the patrons that are shopping at their store. And so part of this, too, was, we only wanted to make sure that the stores that we visited, at least, if they're not on the site, there was a couple reasons. One, they really wanted to see what this was about. So if they're not on the site, doesn't mean that they're not a good store.
Sure.
But secondly, some of these stores, in our mind, weren't worthy of being really profiled. Maybe they weren't big enough. We didn't necessarily think that they should be a store that would represent our image, the one that we would want. And frankly, I wouldn't shop there. Many of the stores that are on that site, if not all of them, is somewhere I would shop, and that's how we looked at it.
Again, the website is mydetroitgrocers.com. My guest right now is Martin Manna, president of the Chaldean American Chamber of Commerce. They've just created this website to give people more information about where they can go to shop, what types of stores exist out there. There's photos and a map location of all of these different things. One of the problems people will complain about some of the independent stores is that, you know, it tends to be, or at least there's a perception that it's more expensive than going to some of the bigger chains. And maybe that's because you don't have the same sort of purchasing power that a Walmart has or a Kroger, for that matter. What sort of things can you tell people about that? And is there a possibility of, you know, maybe maximizing this group in a different way to boost the purchasing power so they can indeed be more competitive with the Walmarts, which is the real tough thing?
Yeah, I don't think anyone really can deal with Walmart. I think that's just the reality.
The ship has sailed, right?
Right, and if you look at these stores, what was interesting to us is it was even difficult getting them all in a room together. They're very competitive. People don't know that they're at each other's throats. They're
nearby each other, yeah.
That's one of the challenges. And if you look at one of the other items we put on the website is some of these stores have a website that you could link to, and then there's sale paper. So you've seen comparisons in the past, but if you were to compare the major items, what Detroiters typically buy in that store compared to a suburban store, I would bet you 9 times out of 10 the independent store would have cheaper prices.
Martin Manna, my guest again, president of the Chaldean American Chamber of Commerce. You know, what do you hope comes of this? Do you see the tide turning in the way people at least perceive what's available in the city of Detroit? Because that has been the big argument. All the national stories say there are no grocery stores in Detroit. And 85 stores tells a different story.
Slowly, the tide is turning, but the other part of this is if you look at history and the fact that Detroit and the state have given tax abatements to Farmer Jack, to Kroger. There was another example of Zaccaro's Market, Detroit Foodland. All of those stores have gone out of business. It takes a special person to be able to understand the community they're serving, adapt to it, and carry the products that they need. And now you have this big story about Whole Foods coming in, Meijer, and again, we're giving away our hard-earned dollars, our tax-paying dollars to go to these stores to subsidize them to open in the city. I think Detroit deserves a Whole Foods, it deserves a Meijer, but it shouldn't be at the expense of taxpayers, and it shouldn't be at the expense of these grocers that have been serving the city for 40 years.
So are you getting anybody's attention about that?
Slowly. I think it's an uphill battle, and I think, just like anything, there's two sides to every issue, but I think history has shown that government subsidies for supermarkets in the city of Detroit hasn't worked, and it's probably we should start looking at other ways of attracting independent grocers.
All right. Martin Manna, president of the Chaldean American Chamber of Commerce. We appreciate your time. The website, mydetroitgrocers.com. You've got all the different markets in the city of Detroit on this map here. You've got links, photographs of them all, pictures of the businesses on the outside, the inside. And I want to ask you one last question. You have right on the website here, it says guaranteed fresh with the Detroit Independent Grocer seal on the front. What's that guarantee?
So we've asked a lot of the retailers that they would guarantee the items that they sell. So they guarantee freshness, they guarantee the products that they're selling, and it's something that many of the grocers are actually profiling and exhibiting in their store, that they guarantee freshness at their store.
Okay. Well, congratulations on getting this put together. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Martin Mann, again, of the Chaldean American Chamber of Commerce, joining us here on the Craig Folly Show on 101.9 WDET.